March 8, 1968. Somewhere beneath the freezing waters of the North Pacific, a Soviet submarine vanished. It wasn't attacked. It didn't send a distress call. It simply disappeared. On board were 98 sailors. For weeks, the Soviet Navy searched desperately across thousands of square miles of open ocean. Ships swept the surface. Aircraft flew overhead. Submarines searched below. They found nothing. No wreckage. No oil, no trace. Eventually, the search was abandoned. Officially, K-129 was declared lost. The Soviet Union believed the submarine, and everything inside it, would remain hidden forever. They were wrong. Halfway across the world, the United States already knew something. The Soviets didn't. They knew roughly where the submarine had sunk. Not because they had seen it, because they had heard it. Years before K-129 disappeared, the US Navy quietly built a classified underwater listening network known as SOSUS. Hidden across the ocean floor, its sensors constantly monitored the Pacific for the sound of Soviet submarines. On the same day K-129 vanished, the network detected a violent underwater acoustic event. At first, analysts didn't know what it was. Then Soviet ships began searching the exact same area. Suddenly, everything made sense. The Americans hadn't just detected an explosion. They had likely pinpointed the resting place of one of the Soviet Union's most secret military assets. For the CIA, that discovery raised an impossible question. What if they recovered it first? K-129 wasn't just another submarine. It carried nuclear ballistic missiles, encrypted communication equipment, navigation systems, code books. Every piece of equipment represented years of Soviet military research. If even a fraction of it survived the sinking, it could become one of the greatest intelligence discoveries of the Cold War. There was only one problem. The submarine rested nearly 3 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean. No one had ever recovered anything remotely that large from that depth. Most engineers believed it couldn't be done. The CIA wasn't interested in what couldn't be done. They wanted to know what it would take. The answer wasn't a submarine. It wasn't another Navy ship. It was something entirely new. A vessel so unusual that if anyone discovered its real purpose, the mission would be over before it began. Which created another problem. How do you build one of the most advanced ships ever constructed without telling the world why? The answer came from one of the most eccentric billionaires in American history, Howard Hughes. By the early 1970s, Hughes had become famous for chasing ambitious engineering projects that few people understood. If newspapers announced he was building a massive ship to mine the ocean floor, hardly anyone would question it. It sounded exactly like something Howard Hughes would do. That was precisely why the CIA chose him. Officially, the project was a commercial mining operation. The ship would recover manganese nodules from the seabed, small, mineral-rich rocks believed to contain valuable metals. It sounded futuristic, expensive, and just believable enough. In reality, deep-sea mining was only a cover. The real mission had nothing to do with minerals. Every blueprint, every design decision, every dollar spent pointed toward one objective: recover K-129, without the Soviet Union ever realizing it. Construction began under extraordinary secrecy. When the Hughes Glomar Explorer was finally launched, it immediately stood out. It was over 600 feet long, but its most important feature couldn't be seen from the outside. Hidden beneath the center of the ship was a giant opening called a moon pool. Anything lowered through it disappeared directly into the ocean while remaining hidden inside the vessel. To anyone watching nearby, the ship appeared completely ordinary. The recovery operation itself would remain invisible. It was an elegant solution. Now all they needed was a way to lift a Soviet submarine from nearly 16,500 feet below the surface. And no one had ever built a machine capable of doing that. The CIA had just approved one of the most ambitious engineering projects in history. To recover K-129, engineers first had to solve a problem no one had ever faced. There wasn't a cable on Earth strong enough to lift a submarine from nearly 3 miles below the surface. So they abandoned the idea entirely. Instead, they designed a giant mechanical claw. Known simply as the capture vehicle, it would descend to the ocean floor, lock around the wreck, and slowly pull it back to the surface. Getting it there was another challenge. Rather than using one enormous cable, engineers assembled thousands of feet of steel pipe, connecting each section one by one until the recovery vehicle finally reached the seabed. The entire operation took days, and once it started, there was no turning back. In the summer of 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer arrived above the wreck. From a distance, nothing looked unusual. The ship drifted quietly in the middle of the Pacific, appearing to conduct routine mining operations. Even when Soviet surveillance ships passed nearby, they saw little more than a strange commercial vessel floating alone at sea. Everything important was happening inside. Hidden beneath the ship, the moon pool doors opened. The first section of pipe disappeared into the water, then another, and another. Slowly, the recovery system began its descent into complete darkness. For days, the crew worked almost non-stop. The deeper the equipment traveled, the greater the risk became. A sudden storm, a mechanical failure, one broken connection. Any of them could end the mission instantly. Nearly 16,500 feet below the surface, cameras finally revealed something no human had seen in more than 6 years. K-129, The submarine rested silently on the ocean floor, partially buried beneath layers of sediment. Its hull had been crushed by the immense pressure. Large sections were twisted beyond recognition. Yet despite the damage, there was no mistaking what it was. The crew had found their target. Now came the moment everything depended on. The giant claw slowly moved into position. Operators aboard the Glomar Explorer watched grainy black and white monitors as its steel arms closed around the wreck. The room fell silent. Months of planning, years of preparation, everything now depended on a machine operating nearly 3 miles beneath the Pacific. Then, one by one, the indicators turned green. The submarine was secure. The lift had begun. At first, everything went exactly as planned. The wreck slowly rose from the ocean floor. Foot by foot, it climbed toward the surface. But the higher it traveled, the more stress the damaged hull endured. After years underwater, the submarine had become far more fragile than anyone realized. Then, without warning, the impossible happened. The submarine began to break apart. For a moment, no one aboard the Glomar Explorer knew what had happened. Then the instruments told the story. The weight suspended beneath the ship had suddenly dropped. Nearly 3 miles below, years of corrosion and the stress of the lift had finally taken their toll. A large section of K129 had broken away. Within seconds, it disappeared back into the darkness. There was no way to retrieve it. Some of the submarine's most valuable secrets were likely gone forever. But the mission wasn't over. The remaining section was still secured inside the capture vehicle. Slowly, the lift continued. Hour after hour, the wreck climbed toward the surface until, for the first time in more than 6 years, part of K129 disappeared into the Glomar Explorer's hidden moon pool. No one outside the ship saw it happen. From a distance, the vessel still looked like it was conducting routine mining operations. The cover story had worked. Inside, engineers began examining what they had recovered. Although much of the submarine had been lost during the ascent, investigators still gained valuable insight into Soviet construction methods, equipment, and technology. But perhaps the most unexpected discovery wasn't military at all. Inside the recovered section were the remains of several Soviet sailors. Rather than treating them as enemy casualties, the CIA conducted a formal burial at sea. The sailors were placed in metal caskets. The Soviet naval flag was displayed. Military honors were observed. Years later, after the Cold War had ended, the United States quietly gave the recording of the ceremony to Russia. It remains one of the few moments of respect shared between two intelligence rivals during one of history's most dangerous conflicts. For a time, the operation remained completely secret. The Hughes Glomar Explorer returned home, and the public continued believing it had been built to mine the ocean floor. That changed in 1975, when journalists uncovered evidence linking the ship to a classified CIA mission. Reporters demanded answers. Government officials refused. Instead, they issued a response that would become famous around the world. They could neither confirm nor deny the existence of the operation. The phrase became known as the Glomar response, and it's still used by governments today when refusing to acknowledge classified programs. As more information was declassified over the following decades, the true scale of Project Azorian finally became clear. The CIA had spent hundreds of millions of dollars, built a one-of-a-kind ship, and attempted something nearly every expert believed was impossible. They didn't recover everything they wanted, but they proved the mission could be done. Today, K129 still rests on the floor of the Pacific. Much of the submarine and many of its secrets remain exactly where they fell more than half a century ago. The Cold War is usually remembered through spies, missiles, and nuclear standoffs. But one of its boldest operations happened in complete silence, nearly 3 miles beneath the ocean. A mission hidden behind a fake mining company, a ship built for a purpose no one was supposed to know, and a submarine that disappeared, only to become the center of one of the most remarkable intelligence operations in modern history.